the live stream, let you know when it's done, and I guess that we can start then. Just a few seconds while Zoom is connecting to YouTube.
Okay, do you want me to get started?
Yep, we're live. Can go
Okay,
ahead.
sure. So I'm going to be talking today about Uno platform, the open source framework for creating cross-platform applications with C# and XAML, targeting just about any platform that you want to target. So I'm going to tell you what the problem that Uno is trying to solve is, how it works, how to use it, and what features you can hope to find. And at the end, we'll look at a few more advanced controls that you can use with Uno. So why is cross-platform development such a big problem worth solving? So there are a lot of platforms out there at the moment. There's 3 major desktop operating systems. There's 2 major mobile operating systems. And then you've got the web as well, which is a very important platform for applications in its own right. And each of those platforms has its own UI framework, normally its own system calls for non-UI things, like, for example, handling notifications. And normally each of those different platforms and each of their different frameworks have their own programming language as well and their own programming model. So if you want a native application for all of those, and you want to write it in the native framework using the native language in each case, then you have to write your program out n many times, where n is the number of platforms you want to support. And then if you decide in the future that you want to add another platform, you have to write it all out again. Now, a related problem is migrating existing applications from one platform to another. And a common case there is having legacy line of business applications that were probably originally written to run just on a single operating system on the desktop, that a lot of companies now want to migrate to be a web application for easier deployment or other reasons. So if you have to write out an application n times in n many different environments and languages, for a start, that's just going to take you more time, but also it puts a lot of pressure on the development team that you have, having to cover a lot of different stacks with different and incompatible paradigms, and it can be a pain. So the solution that we offer is to write your application once. So with Uno platform, you write your application in XAML and C#. It runs in .NET, and it runs on Windows desktop, on Mac OS and Linux, on the web in browsers using WebAssembly, and on Android and iOS. So Uno is free, it's open source. And just to let you know, it's sustained through the so-called Red Hat model. So we offer it for free by supporting the core team through the paid enterprise support contracts with enterprises that use Uno. So let me take you through a very quick history lesson of Uno. So the software itself actually dates back about 8 years. So we created it internally at Inventive in Montreal in Canada. We've used it on a number of production apps. And in 2018, we saw that Microsoft were creating support for running .NET in WebAssembly. So WebAssembly was quite new at the time. And if you don't know, WebAssembly allows you to run code written in pretty much any language you want natively inside the browser. And Microsoft just released .NET runtime support for WebAssembly. So we thought that that was a great opportunity. At the time, we supported Android and iOS. We brought in support for WebAssembly, and we open sourced Uno and shared it with the world. So since then, a lot's happened. We've added support for new platforms. We've added Mac OS, Linux. Since then, WinUI 3 was announced as well. So WinUI 3 is basically the next evolution of the UWP framework. So Uno is compatible with WinUI 3. It's also compatible with UWP. So what that means is that if you have existing UWP applications, you can use the code as it is in an Uno platform application, and the same for WinUI 3. Not this year, last year, we've also added support for the material design system and also the Fluent design system that ships with WinUI. And we've been busy this year as well. It's hot off the presses, in fact, but with the 3.6 release, we've also introduced Cupertino theming support. So if you want to have an Apple-like visual presentation on any platform, including the web, then you can just drop that into your Uno application. So let me talk a bit more about how Uno works and what it does. So as I mentioned, it's compatible with the UWP, Universal Windows Platform, and with WinUI 3. And actually, when you run an Uno platform application on Windows, it is a UWP or WinUI application. So when you, for the target application that's running on Windows, Uno is not in the stack when it's actually running. It's just a UWP or a WinUI application. So what Uno does then is sort of act as a bridge to other platforms to take that UWP or WinUI application model and make it run everywhere. So the easy part is .NET, since .NET already runs pretty much everywhere. And then what Uno is doing is making the XAML work, making all your visual elements work, and making all the non-visual APIs work as well. So in terms of the visual elements, Uno creates an actual native app in that it's tapping into the native UI frameworks on most of the platforms. So on iOS, it's tapping into the UIKit framework. So it's creating UI views if you're familiar with iOS development. Likewise, on the web, it's creating HTML DOM elements, and that's how it's rendering content to the page. But at the same time, there's also a distinction from the model where you map the elements defined in your application to high-level native controls. So if you declare a button into your application, for example, it's not creating a native button by default. So it doesn't use the native button control on Android or native button control on iOS. Instead, it's creating the same visual primitives on all platforms using the native views. So we find that it strikes a really good balance between having access to the native API and being able to easily handle things like gesture support, accessibility, and other stuff that comes sort of in the box with the native framework for each platform, but at the same time giving you really pixel perfect consistency from one platform to the other as the default. So unless you choose otherwise, if you define a particular UI, it will look exactly the same on all platforms that you're targeting. And of course, you can customize that if you want to, if you prefer to have different look on each platform, that's completely doable as well. But by default, you get pixel perfect consistency across platforms. So let's jump into a demo now and see what that actually looks like. So I'm going to create a new application in Visual Studio. So I've already installed the Uno platform solution templates from the marketplace, but they're very easy to install. You just go to extensions in Visual Studio and search for Uno. So I'm going to create a new project. Cross-platform app with the Uno platform. Put it in my demo folder. Here we go. So you might notice here that there's quite a lot of platforms supported. And this is the solution we get. I'm just going to collapse that. So to get you oriented with what an Uno platform solution looks like, there's normally one project in Visual Studio for each target platform that you can support. So you can see there's a lot of them. And then there's a shared project, which is referenced by each actual project. And the shared project is normally where all of the code and the assets in your application live. So I don't need all of these for now. I'm just going to unload them. And we'll start with the UWP head. So this is the target project which runs on Windows. Now, if you've done any UWP development or Windows Phone development or even WPF development, then the API that you get here is going to be pretty familiar. If you're coming from a Xamarin Forms background, for example, then there are some things that are very similar, like layouting, data binding, for example. And then there are other things in the sort of UWP, WPF model that are a bit different, like styling, control templating, but it's still pretty easy to get up and running with the UWP API, which Uno is using. So what we got here, we've got a simple hello world application. I'm going to run it on Windows. I'll move Visual Studio to one side. So one nice feature in UWP is the hot reload feature. So I can edit the XAML on the fly. I can change this text block for a text box and it will automatically update for me. Let's put that at the top. Let's put it in the center. So let's make a slightly less trivial UI setup here. So let's create a button and we'll bind the content of the button to the content of the text box. So we'll give the text box a name. And we're going to create a binding. Binding, bind by the element's name, text box, and the path to the property is going to be the text property. So now we've got a button with the same content as the text box, and it will update as we change the content of the text box. So that's nice. Let's do some cross-platform development now. So if I want to run it on the web, what do I need to do? I'll load back in the WebAssembly project. And I'll start the application. And it's going to compile and then it's going to launch the browser with my application. It takes a little bit longer on WebAssembly, but not too long. So here we go. Now it's running my application. And you can see I've got my text box and button again. And you can see that it updates in exactly the same way. And you'll notice that it's the same pretty much to the pixel as the Windows version. And the same thing is true for Android, iOS, Mac OS, Linux as well. And we've also got hot reload on WebAssembly as well. So for example, if I change the background of my button, it'll update in my running application. So right now, that's all I wanted to show you, just how simple it is to get up and running with Uno and run code on multiple platforms. Let's talk a bit more about the features provided by Uno. So I'm not going to go into each of these one by one, but as I said, if you've used UWP or WPF before or Silverlight, then pretty much everything you'd expect to find, you'll find in Uno. And as I said, if you come from a different XAML dialect like Xamarin Forms, you'll also find a lot familiar to get started with. And if you want to check out some of these features in action, we've got a web application built with Uno. You'll find it at gallery.platform.uno. And you can see all those features running. You can see the code that's being used. And you can try it out. So another nice feature is support for shared assets. So if you use images in your application, you put your images in the assets folder. You name them using the naming conventions from WinUI, And then Uno is smart enough to take those images and put them in the right place for each target platform and use the correct naming conventions for each platform. So if you have high density images for Windows, it will put them in the correct folder and name for high density images for Android and iOS and so on. Likewise for strings, a common requirement is to have to localize an application for multiple languages, and the WinUI contract makes it really easy to do that. So you create a RESW file for each language with all of the string values. You reference that from your XAML, and then that just works on every platform. And Uno under the hood copies the strings to each platform and uses the native string resource format for those platforms. So you don't have to worry about any of that. Since it's compatible with UWP and WinUI, there's a lot of existing libraries written for UWP that have been compiled for Uno, so you can use them with your Uno platform application. So there's presentation frameworks you can use like Prism, Reactive UI, MVVM Cross. There's control suites like the Windows Community Toolkit and ones from third parties like Syncfusion and Infragistics. And of course, you can use any .NET Standard 2.0 library because it's a .NET application. Themes. So I mentioned that we've added support for different design themes. So these are libraries of control styles, and it's a few lines of code then in essence that you add to your application in your application resources, and then all the controls that you add in your UI will by default use styles defined in those libraries. So you've got the Fluent UI style if you want to use the Fluent style theme from Windows 10. You've got material design from Android, and just a few days ago we've released Uno 3.6, and with that including the Cupertino theme. So if you want to use Apple's design guidelines, and of course you can mix and match if you want to use different styles for different platforms, or if you want to mix it up at runtime. The API is very powerful for styling your application exactly the way you want to. And one thing I should mention is that all these themes support both light and dark mode. So by default, if a user is using their device in dark mode, then it will use the dark versions of each style. And these are some applications that have been built with Uno over the years, as I mentioned, in its long history. So the Uno platform playground. I will show this one quickly. So this is another web application that we've built with Uno. And this one lets you take the XAML as well as data that you want to data bind to and runs it on the web. And you can put pretty much anything you want here. There's a lot of predefined snippets. So there's a button snippet, various advanced features, and you can write your own code here. So For example, if I copy the code that we just put here, it might not find the background because we're not in the application. I haven't enabled auto run. Okay, there we go. So you can see it's running the same code in the browser, and you can also save this snippet as a link that you can go back to at any time. So that's just a neat little way to test out XAML anytime you want to, and also to share XAML snippets with other people. UI testing. One thing we always have felt is really important is being able to test your applications. And for UI-driven applications, the gold standard is to be able to actually test the UI itself to see that it does what you want it to be doing when a user actually interacts with it. So what we've done is created Uno.UITest, which allows you to test your application on multiple platforms, your Uno platform application. So it's based on the Xamarin UI test library for iOS and Android. So we've taken that API, so you can use existing Xamarin.UITest tests, and we've made it work on WebAssembly as well. So you can write tests that interact with your application and run them as normal unit tests, run them locally on your CI build, and verify that your application is actually doing what you expect it to do. And as for Uno itself, that's open source and it's free. SkiaSharp Support. So Skia is another rendering engine that's also cross-platform. It's available pretty much everywhere. And SkiaSharp is a binding library that lets you use Skia in .NET applications. And Skia is nice for not for writing the bulk of your application, but for certain use cases where you want to do sort of intensive image manipulation, for example, or you want to get very like close to the metal access to what your pixels are doing, then SkiaSharp is a very nice tool to have. So you can use it on your Uno platform application, on desktop, on mobile, on the web in WebAssembly. And there's a demo web application that you can check out at skiasharp-wasm.platform.uno. And also a nice application of SkiaSharp Support is the Infragistics control suite. So these are controls released by Infragistics for Uno platform that give you advanced visualizations like graphs, data grids, and so on. And they're actually using SkiaSharp for the rendering. So I'm going to do a demo of one of those now. So I'll go back to Visual Studio, open up my Infragistics demo. So this is an application that's pretty simple, but it's neat. I like it. This is the code. So we're creating a picture and then a chart underneath the picture. You can see how it looks. And as I move my mouse over the picture, what you're seeing down the bottom is actually the RGB values under the mouse for each pixel. So if I move my mouse over this green sign here in the picture, you can see in the chart there's a lot of green and blue, not very much red. If I move it now over the black, the dark gray, you can see that the red, green, and blue values are lower. So the main interesting thing here, of course, is the chart, and I can interact with the chart. I can hover my mouse over each point and see the values of that point. I can zoom in with my scroll wheel or select an area of the graph to zoom in. And I'm going to get the same thing if I run it on WebAssembly or on other platforms. So this is using the XAML data chart control that's coming from Infragistics. And to look a bit at the code, it's using this Picture Explorer control, which is just hooking up to the pointer moved event and then just querying the bitmap at the point that at the location that the pointer is currently over, and creating an event with the values at that point that's then pulled into the view model. It'll take a couple of moments. So this is taking a little longer because it's using ahead of time compilation. So I'm probably not going to get into it right now, but there's a few different options for how you compile your WebAssembly application when you're on your Uno platform application on the web. So the version that gives the highest runtime performance is ahead of time compilation, but it's also taking a bit longer to compile. So here we go. We're running it on WebAssembly now in the browser. See, we get the same thing. See here over the pink, we get red and blue. I can hover again. I can zoom in with or out with the scroll wheel. And you can see it's nicely responsive. Let's make a little bit of a customization. So if we wanted to add another line series to this graph, for example, let's say red, green, and blue are a bit basic. Let's say we want to see the purple channel. So we'll add another property to our color data class, which is providing each data point. So purple, say it's red and blue. Take the average, red and blue, split it by 2. And then again, we're using data binding in XAML to show each of these line series. And I haven't gotten into data binding itself, but it's basically it's not the only way to connect up your model and your views in XAML, but it's probably the standard way, and it's very powerful. So here for this series, we're going to give it a different name. We'll bind it to the purple path, and let's use the purple color brush to show the series and the outline. Let's run that again. Again, it's going to take a few moments to compile. So you can see here in our XAML data chart, we've got various properties defined. We've added an x-axis definition, a y-axis definition, and then we've populated the series collection with all the line series that we want to show. So we've got red, green, and blue, and now we've just added our purple line series. And we've also added other layers there, like this crosshair layer, which shows the crosshair overlay. Okay. So now, if we hover over now we can see we've got 4 line series instead of 2. And if I hover over these pink line, these pink letters in the picture, I can see that I've got my purple channel represented here, and it's halfway between red or blue, which is what we define it to be. So that's good. So that gives you an idea of how you can use that particular control, and I think gives you an idea of some of the more advanced visualization for sort of business applications and other data heavy applications you can do with Uno. So that's bringing me towards the close of my presentation. What have we got in plans for the future for Uno? So one big thing that's happening right now is that WinUI 3, the next evolution of UWP, the next evolution of Microsoft's native framework is being released. So we're tracking it every step of the way. We've got day 0 support for all of the WinUI releases that have come out so far this year, and the I think officially stable release for WinUI 3 desktop has just come out a few days ago. So that's pretty exciting, and we'll definitely continue to track that and release further updates as that progresses rapidly. We're adding support for additional controls all the time. So one big ask was having support for date pickers in the web. We previously had date picker support for mobile, but not WebAssembly, and that's just been added. We're adding, we've been adding new platforms recently. So recently in the past 6 months to a year. So Mac OS has been added, Linux has been added. Tizen support was added. And if we find more that we want to add, we'll add more. And performance is another thing that we're working on. So WebAssembly is a relatively new platform in effect. There's a lot of work going on from the Microsoft side to optimize the performance of the .NET runtime on WebAssembly, and there's work going on our side as well to optimize the performance of Uno platform in WebAssembly every way that we can. One last thing, if you would care to fill out a survey about the presentation, you can go into a draw to win a subscription to the Introduction to Uno platform course on Udemy. So please go ahead and follow that link and fill out the survey. And that's all. Thanks very much for your time, and very happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, David. Yeah, I actually wanted to ask you something. Can I reuse Xamarin Forms library in Uno, or is there a way to?
So it depends. So on Android and iOS, if you're developing for Android and iOS, and you want to use a Xamarin library that doesn't depend on the Forms visual layer, then you can definitely do that, because Uno is running on Xamarin for Android and iOS and Mac. So, so any Xamarin library that's not using the Xamarin Forms visual parts, that will definitely work.
Okay.
If that makes sense.
Yeah, I understand, because the XAML is it's another flavor of XAML for Xamarin Forms, right?
Right.
Yeah, I remember there was something like a XAML standard, but that's not going to happen. I don't know.
Yeah, that
what happened to
seems
that project.
that seems to have dropped off. Yeah, but
Yeah.